The last of the Presoc6 I want to talk about is one called Heraclitus. He's kind of out there on his own, I suppose, as far as this goes. But what Heraclitus does is Heraclitus suggests that, he has this famous saying, you cannot step into the same river twice. What Heraclitus is saying with that is, you step into a river and you put your foot in and you take your foot out, but, A, you can never put your foot in the same spot, but even that, there's different water. The river is changing. The water at the bottom of the river is changing. Fish are moving to different locations. And so you put your foot into this river, you step out, and you go back to get in this river, but it's a different river because there's different water, there's different dirt at the bottom, rocks have moved, fish have moved, and so you are no longer in the same river. It may be similar, but it's not the same river. The implication of this is that you can't utter anything about reality. Why? Because by the time you utter a statement about the way reality is, it has changed. And you're uttering a statement about the way reality was when you put your foot in this river, not the river itself, because the river is constantly changing. And so you can't make statements about the world because the world is in a constant state of change. Now, with that said, and then you can go even further. There are followers of him who actually would go so far as to say you can't even say anything you can't even put your foot in the river once, because before you get your foot to the bottom, the river has changed. The world is just constantly changing, and so we can't know anything. So it poses really more of an epistemological problem with how do you utter something about the world when the world is constantly changing. As an example of this, my son is 3, and he is in preschool right now. Now, he just started preschool, and he's 3, and he goes there, and he's got some, there are 10 kids in his class, and chances are that he probably won't end up going to the same school as a lot of these kids, and maybe not even the same high school. He may not even live in the same area, but maybe 15, 20 years from now, he will end up somewhere, and somebody who is in that same preschool will end up being, being around. And so they'll say, maybe one of those people will say, well, they'll run into each other at the halls of a college or an office, and they say, hey, I just met this guy. His name's Max McKenzie, and he asked me out. I want to go on a date with him. This is somebody that is perhaps he's asked out, and he says, do you know him? And he says, Max, yeah, I went to school with him. Oh, you did? Yeah, he was great. He really was good at being line leader, and he loved to color and paint. He sometimes would eat glue. He got a little aggressive with the trains. He gets time out a lot for that. He loves trains, and so he oftentimes gets in trouble because he doesn't like the other kids to take his trains or to use the track when he's trying to. And so what happens is that what they say about Max, who is 3, is probably not going to be true about Max, who's 23. Right? The Max who's 23 is probably not going to be the same. And if they haven't met him or known him since then, they're trying to tell this person what Max is like, they're not really going to be making true statements about Max. And so the idea is that, you can't utter a statement about Max at 3 and have it still be true at 23. And so what happens is that we have to come to the conclusion that as far as Max is concerned, as far as this goes, as far as uttering statements about somebody that it's a constant change. That even beyond that, you can't say something about somebody even today because they're changing, they're constantly changing, and the person you talk about now is not the same person as the person in the future. Now we pause and we say, well, is that fair? Is that true? And I think there is some truth to that. That things are constantly changing, and you can't make statements. But I think that what probably the problem for Heraclitus is you're right, the river is changing, but it's changing in a way that is very similar. If you speak generally, and you speak about the river in general terms, you can make statements that hold beyond the moment. As an example of this, there was a movie called, series of movies called, documentaries called 7 Up. And what it was is it was a sociologist, psychologist's experiment in which he wanted to take a group of 7-year-olds and videotape them, film them in their preschool, and see what they were like, and then he was going to come back every 7 years and videotape and see what they were like, and show. And what his theory was is that if you show the child, you'll show the man. That what the child is like will become what the man is like. And they've done this series. It was a group of British student kids when they were 7, and these kids are now probably about 50, maybe even quite a bit older than that. And what he did is every year, or for every 7 years, would leave them alone for 7 years, and they would come back and they would videotape them. And so they showed these 7-year-olds, and they showed kids who were, from rich families and poor families, working class, etc. And they showed kids who were aggressive on the playground, and kids who couldn't keep their mind on anything. And he came back at 14, and he found that some of the kids who were from wealthy, families, they had become kids who were, had epitomized what wealthy kids would do, or kids who were kind of all over the place were still all over the place, and kids who were aggressive were still aggressive, and kids who were happy-go-lucky, or kids who were loners were still loners, and so what happened is he's followed them, and now it's like at 42 up, I think was the last one I saw, and it may be 49 up, it may be 56 up. I don't know what point they're at in the series. It's been a while since I saw the latest. I don't know where we're at in the series, but the idea is that some of these kids who were like, one kid, like the one I like the best is this one who was all over the place as a kid. He was constantly playing with different things, couldn't keep his mind, was always trying new things. And now as an adult, since he's been doing the documentary, he's had like 18 careers. I mean, he's been a taxi driver. He's been, which is a pretty tough thing in London, because it's a really long process. He's been an actor. He was a small guy. He'd been a horse jockey. You go on and on. He'd been like 6 different careers, fairly, did quite a bit in it, but then he would move on to something else. He'd get bored with it and move on. And that's something that was true of him even as a child. So what happens is if you make a statement about Max, like now, about him, loving trains, maybe, maybe it's his fascination with putting the things together and seeing them move. He's fascinated by that idea. Or he likes to try new things. Or, he can be he likes to be a little obstinate, and he likes to have things his way, or things like that. That you could still say those about him now when he's 3, and they'll probably still be true about him when he's 43 or when he's 53. So in that regard, it is true the river is changing, but it's also within the same basic banks, and that's perhaps one of the problems.